Hello and welcome to Prairie Pulse. Coming up a little bit later in the show, we'll profile Minneapolis artist Gregory Fitz, who's originally from Fergus Falls. But first, joining me now is Reverend Paul Lang of the First Presbyterian Church in Fargo. Thanks so much for joining us today, Reverend.
Glad to be here.
As we get started, tell the folks a little bit about yourself, your background, maybe where you're originally from.
Okay. Well, you can probably tell from my accent, I'm not from the Midwest. I was born in the Carolinas and have spent most of my life in the Southeast, Arkansas, Georgia, the Carolinas. Moved here 4 winters ago and am loving being in Fargo. Both of my degrees, postgraduate degrees, were from Columbia Theological Seminary in Atlanta. And I have a lovely wife who's a professional violinist and who plays here, and 2 adult sons who are in university.
Now, how did you come to the clergy?
Well, I was a young man involved in an entrepreneurial endeavor with a friend of mine from high school all through my college years, and really thought that would be my calling to be in business. And over time, just came to a place where that was less and less fulfilling for me. And ended up making a deal with God, which I think is a perilous thing to try. So the deal was I would work 5 days a week instead of 7, and work for somebody other than myself on Saturday, Habitat or whatever. It turned out to be Habitat for Humanity. And really, over the 6 months that followed that choice of doing something for others, came to the conviction that I was needed to be somewhere else. So I went to seminary reluctantly and uncertainly, each semester finding enough courage to go back one more time, and I don't know, 2 or 3 years into that, decided, yes, this is in fact a call.
Okay. Yeah. Well, we have you here today to talk about matters or religion these days, and probably there's a lot to talk about.
Sure.
First, let's talk with how many members do you have in your church, and tell us how the Presbyterian Church compares with other denominations.
Sure. So First Presbyterian Church here in Fargo has about 650 active members, and we are part of the Presbyterian Church in the United States of America, the PCUSA. That is the largest of the Presbyterian denominations in the country, and we flow out of that Reformed tradition. Calvin was a second-generation Reformer after Martin Luther, and we in the Presbyterian tradition tend to get our emphases and our thoughts from people like John Calvin and John Knox and others of the Reformed faith. That said, we are theologically kissing cousins with all other Christians everywhere, and are essentially just a mainline sort of denomination.
Okay. Yeah. About a year ago or so, you gave a sermon regarding gay marriage about the time, either right before or near the U.S. Supreme Court decision, which legalized gay marriage.
Sure.
Can you tell us about that sermon and maybe your points on that?
Sure. Well, the sermon was one that I preached actually the Sunday after our denomination ratified a choice that had been made the year before to allow same-gender marriages. So that did actually follow the Supreme Court decision, but it was in close proximity. That was a sermon in which it seemed to me it was a time to say something from the pulpit to my congregation. And, we podcast a lot of the sermons at First Presbyterian, and I would venture to guess that an average number of downloads is about 100. That sermon, last time I checked, and it's been a while since I did that, is somewhere north of 6,000. And, I think the reason people are sharing the message is there are a lot of us trying to get some help thinking about these theological issues, and the sermon itself was actually more focused on the question of what does it mean to be a Christian community, given the fact that we are not going to agree about a great many things, this being one of them. So, at First Pres, I've got 650 people. I've often joked that if you want 5 ideas, get 2 Presbyterians and ask them what to do. And so we're a very opinionated lot. My congregation is widely diverse in terms of where people sit on a question like that. So what we have to ask, I think, as a community of faith is, are there any values that we consider to be more important to us and more central to the gospel of Jesus Christ that would keep us unified in the midst of our inability to agree about a great many things, this being one of them? So we, in the Presbyterian tradition, we're helped a bit because our Book of Order says that there are truths about which good people of good moral conviction are going to differ. And in that case, you are to practice mutual forbearance. So without giving you the whole sermon again, I'll simply say it seems to me that the key to this is compassion. We have been arguing about this in my denomination since I was ordained, actually since before I was ordained. And what I see on the floor of presbyteries and General Assembly are passionate people who are passionate precisely because they're hurting on both sides. So if we cannot agree about the specific topic, what we do have in common is that there is an opportunity for us to have some mercy with one another over the pain the other side is feeling. So in my tradition, those who you might think were on the left are the ones who've been in pain for 30 years while we argued about this and denied them access to things like marriage and ordination. Now that that pendulum has swung into a slightly different position, the pain's on the other side. My task as pastor is to try to love both of those groups, to find a way to be present to them in an authentic way and to validate that where they are is okay, that I don't have to convince either side to be somewhere else. So that idea of being compassionate rather than insisting on being right over being kind seems to have resonated.
Okay.
Yeah.
But then does your congregation have a view on same-gender marriage and the Presbyterian Church view?
Well, the congregation itself, as I said, is probably all over the map.
Yeah.
And in fact, the session, who are the local governing body of the congregation, are just as diverse. So if I have 15 elders and 2 pastors that sit in there, and you would find people all the way across the spectrum in terms of points of view in that governing body. So the General Assembly decisions do impact us, but those decisions were made in a way that allow us locally to have a certain measure of autonomy. So it has always been true that pastors like me are given the responsibility of working with couples and deciding whether or not that marriage is advisable, and we only proceed with the marriage if we think it's advisable. And that's true also with same-gender marriages in the same way that it's always been true for heterosexual opposite-gender marriages. The session at First Presbyterian Church in Fargo has decided to treat all couples the same way. So when they present themselves for marriage, without regard to their gender, they go through the same process of discernment with me or with Pastor Mary to sort out whether to be married.
Yeah. Do you think it's a good idea, as I believe now is the case, to allow various churches to, not have to perform a same gender marriage ceremony?
Sure. Yeah, I actually do think that's a good idea. This may seem an odd thing for a pastor to say. I am convinced that it is possible for different congregations and different pastors to come to different conclusions about this and all be faithful. It seems likely to me that there is not one answer to this issue. And let me just say a word about why I come to that conclusion. At least the Presbyterians have been arguing about this since 1978. That is a long argument. We did not arrive at this latest choice accidentally or quickly. And I believe that we have faithfully been praying for God's guidance and for a sense of discernment about what is right all that time. I know that's certainly been true since 1991 when I joined that conversation. At some point, people like me who are fervently praying that God would guide us and who have been expecting God to offer a clear decision, we all agree one way or the other, have to wrestle with the reality that at least my denomination has been divided 51, 49%, 55, 45%, very close votes back and forth. And so it occurs to me that maybe what God wants is not for us to be in agreement, but for us to be faithfully engaged in a conversation with one another about this. That the prayers are in fact answered, but not in the way I was expecting them to be answered. So it's messy,
Okay.
but I'm growing in my sense of confidence that that's all right.
Well, can we, so what does the Bible say about the same gender marriage? Because it gets argued about.
Well, sure,
you know?
sure.
So how many passages are we talking about?
Well, you're talking a couple dozen passages that are probably the most relevant. The question itself presupposes something that I'm not sure I can agree with, which is that the Bible has something to say that's clear. It seems to me that the text itself is really complex. It is multi-voiced. And so whether you're talking about marriage or divorce or human sexuality or a number of these social issues that you do find in the text, you don't find one thing being said. You actually find the text saying a lot of things. So that at least the debates that I've watched within the Presbyterian Church, there are good and faithful people advocating for same-gender marriage who are citing texts. They can point to the scripture that they think authorizes their opinion that this is appropriate behavior. And on the other side, you have people who are citing texts. I think that's exactly how it should be. Christendom has a long habit in our anxiety of trying to take a complicated thing that's a thick file and to reduce it to a thin file, to presume that the text has one thing to say when in fact I think it has many things to say. And if the fact that the text says many things is perceived to be a problem with the text or something that undermines its authority or its validity, then you have to do all sorts of creative gymnastics to try to get the text to say what you want it to say. The alternative would be to say the text is what it is, as messy and sloppy and multi-voiced as it is, and it may be that that's what God wanted us to have, was a messy text. So let me give you a non-homosexuality related example of that, but that I think illustrates why I think the text ought to have all those voices. I'm somebody who is inclined toward depression. So there are times when the Psalms are my friends because there's so many Psalms of lament. And almost all of those Psalms begin with complaints that God has not done what God is supposed to do, but get around to the fact that it's okay because God is a good God and God will rescue us. So we should give praise. But Psalm 88 stands alone. It's a psalm that says, my life is terrible, and you, God, did this to me. Now, I don't need Psalm 88 a lot, but once in a while, that's the psalm I need. That minority voice that says something different than all the other voices that are the majority voice. So I think you can apply that same sort of structure to a lot of other questions. There is a majority voice within the text, but I want the minority voices there for a dark day.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on maybe to a few other things. Let's talk about, is there a decline in church membership, especially in young people?
I think nationally speaking, there's no question. You can sort of look at the statistics and they're a little numbing.
So what's going on? Do you know?
I don't know for sure, but I will tell you there are a number of folks. I'm sure the Lilly Foundation has been researching this. The Barna Foundation has done some research in it, and When they interview people who are in their teens up to, say, late 20s, the research I read tells me that they ask those people, why is faith or the church not appealing to you? And the consistent answer they get back is, you don't look much like Jesus to me. So I think that congregations must get much better at conveying to those who are outside their walls that they look like Jesus. So part of that is to give people the experience when you are interacting with them, the unchurched, for example, or to young people, that they're not being hunted by you. All too often, we in congregations, again, in our anxiety, in our fear, because the large church is shrinking, perceive in that other person a solution to our problem. We have declining numbers, you are the solution to our problem, so we're going to recruit you. Or we have a declining size in our budget, we need you to make a pledge card. But it seems to me that if we would get back in the business of loving people without any expectation about what they're going to provide to us, this problem would solve itself. But you got to get over that sense that these people are a solution to our problem and in the business of doing what I think Jesus did, which is to be present to them in a loving way without a lot of expectations about how they're going to help you.
Okay. Yeah. Turn to Islam just a minute. Talk a little bit about ISIS presidential campaign trail. Just talks a lot about it, whether Muslims should be let into the country. Do you have views on what that means or what it means to you?
Well, I think it is a sad reality that the first reaction in fear is to circle up the wagons and exclude. I understand that impulse because I feel it myself about a variety of people and issues. That said, I have met faithful people who I am convinced have been touched by the holy from a variety of faiths. And I do not think that groups like ISIS in any way authentically demonstrate for us what Islam is about. And many of us who are in the United States, in a country where Christendom is the sort of dominant faith expression, it's really on us to reach out to those who are in smaller communities of faith to try to understand them. I sometimes hear from the campaign trail and in other things, where are all the moderate Muslims? And I think they're out there. But you know, it's hard to stand up and speak when you are already the minority and may already be feeling like there's a target on you. So I think those of us who are in the main line and in the majority need to reach out to them.
Okay. Well, we're about out of time, so if people want more information about your church or religious issues, where would you advise them to go? Who could they contact?
Well, to find out more about First Presbyterian Church, you can go to www.firstpresfargo.org and find us there. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, John.
Stay tuned for more. Originally from Fergus Falls, Minnesota, artist Greg Fitz is now based in Minneapolis. His art is fast and almost graffiti-like in nature. Watching him work is fascinating, as sometimes he can finish a painting in under 10 minutes. Here's a profile.
I work fast. Very little of this work has more than minutes involved. I want to work faster. I want to work as immediately as possible, but tend to be with construction grade materials, real modest materials. The paintings are on extruded polystyrene insulation. These paintings are on a foil-faced insulation. The big panels are on simple plywood OSB. I actually knew about the Nemeth because they've been showing great people. And I've had friends and colleagues show work up here. I've kind of admired the program for a while. And it was great to get a phone call. And then I came up this spring and saw the room, and it was just lights out. And for this one, we settled on 3 different series of painting, new iterations of them, and then a singular photo. Yeah, and kind of built around the theme of landscape and natural representation, again in this spot spanning between abstraction and claimed representation. You know, it's amazing to me. I grew up in Fergus, right? And it's been incredible to watch the attention that the arts get and the work these people are doing, both in Fergus and Park Rapids. There's an art center opening in Bemidji, to bring really interesting work out to these locations.
In contrast to our permanent collection of paintings, with some dating back to the 16th century, we exhibit contemporary living artists, mostly non-traditional work. And with help from our exhibition committee, we're able to bring Gregory Fitz to Park Rapids. This is a very unique situation that we have here, because normally you would have to travel to Bemidji or Minneapolis or Fargo to experience contemporary art in this way.
It's great actually to be back in this part of the state, right? I've lived in Minneapolis since 1996. I went there for school, work at Macalester, work in St. Paul. Danielle and I have a house in Minneapolis. But it's pretty fun coming back out to my country, right? And bringing my work with. The last few years, I've been mostly working with glazes of acrylic, the sunrises and sunsets, still working with that process. But a few years ago, I don't know, I got keen on spray paint. The paintings are all skewing between representations of claimed natural phenomena, sunrises and sunsets, fleeting natural phenomena, and abstraction. In the Aurora Borealis paintings, spray paint does these beautiful hazy mists on a surface that I can't get with a brush. And so they toy with that interplay between the illusion or representation of how northern light might behave if you witnessed it versus the sort of industrial process that makes that illusion, makes that physical presence of the paint possible. And the new painting, that's more or less the process that I'm drawing on. Something where it is utilitarian and it's a mechanical intervention rather than the intervention of the hand and the brush. Spray painting is great for writing, it makes those gestures. The spray paint, I was first using it just as a way of quickly scribing, writing, and getting those mists. And now I'm using it more to obscure, cover, and write. 400 is in March 2015. This past March, we crossed this threshold of 400 parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere. And this is just an astounding benchmark from a climate change perspective. And as we race towards at least 2 degrees of warming, it just became a fixture for me. Since I'm making work that is essentially landscape-based work, it was a way of starting to insert some language and some content and then covering it up and just stacking up layers. And it's sort of a touchstone. The work I'm interested in, at least now, is work that is very immediate, it's fast, and it's a little noisy and a little cumbersome. It's not virtuosic painting. But that's the sort of work that seems tense to me. And for years what it was is I would look at paintings I was halfway through and I liked them at that stage, but then I would go through this process of finishing it and legitimizing it, and I always missed that earlier, rawer moment. I think with minimalism, if somebody is willing to give you the benefit of the doubt, they can meet you halfway. And that's the risk. Someone can dismiss them. I've had people tell me, they're like, well, what did that take you 10 minutes? I was like, well, 5 really, right? And so it's also a way of kind of wondering aloud about how we use labor to qualify accomplishment. How many hours something took. I'm interested in jazz musicians who are playing a solo, and that solo is happening in real time and in real space, but it represents years of decisions making and years of practice, even though it's happening in the moment, Maybe there's some of that. And then it just comes from personal bias, right? Like, I like reductive, spare, minimalist work. I like John Lee Hooker. I don't listen to Mozart.
Well, that's all we have for Prairie Pulse this week, and as always, thanks for watching.
Funding for Minnesota Legacy programs are provided by a grant from the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, with money from the vote of the people of Minnesota on November 4th, 2008. And by the members of Prairie Public.